The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hello, welcome to a discussion with Dr. Janet Wolfe. My guest today is Dr. Janet Wolfe, author of What to Do When He Has a Headache, and I'm Pat Lindquist. Welcome to the Twin Cities.
Nice to be here.
Dr. Wolfe has some great credentials as well as a fun book for us to discuss today. She's the executive director of the Institute for Rational Emotive Therapy in New York City and is a clinical psychologist and sex therapist with more than 20 years of experience in working with men and couples. And women. I just said men. I think that was my problem. And I guess I should understand what rational emotive therapy is, Dr. Wolfe, before we begin.
Well, rational emotive therapy is an approach to therapy that's been around now for about 30 years, and originally it was considered almost heresy because it was really developed as a sort of alternative to psychoanalysis. And what we believe is that, yes, most of us, many of us have had dysfunctional families that we've come from, and certainly a nutty society, but that we don't have to spend years on the couch, you know, remembering what your mother did to you when you're 2 and what your father said to you when you were 4 in order to sort of get on with your life. So we help people identify the belief systems and the self-defeating behaviors they're currently exhibiting and try to get them to change them in the here and now. And that can be usually done in a much shorter period of time than psychoanalysis can.
Well, I like it better when you don't keep blaming the past, too. I mean, you take a little responsibility for your own adult behavior as we grow up and
exactly.
Look at our problems.
The past is certainly an influence, but the core of rational emotive therapy is that it isn't things that disturb us, it's the views that we take of them. So the same two people could have come from a very abusive background, and one of them really might be spending the rest of their lives feeling very self-pitying, and the other one might have gone through a period of that, but have decided, heck, I'm not going to waste any of the rest of my life stewing, you know, in my old juices. I'm really going to move on.
Well, now, after 20 years of working with couples and people's problems, you've put together something for us to read as a layman out there in the field. And this book came out last year, I understand, as a hardcover.
Yes.
And during the last year's first initial introduction in the country, you hit the circuit with Oprah and Sonia. And what was the initial reaction? Were couples able to ask you questions on the air? And
yes, they were. And actually what's happened in the past year is that I have gotten thousands of letters from women saying, you know, thank heavens that they've come out of the closet with this, because it's a problem that so many women have felt so ashamed about, that their mates weren't sexually interested in them. And I've gotten many, many letters from people saying it really helped me calm down about it and to
well, you know, we all love to know that other people have the same problems that we're dealing with. And in a sexual way, I imagine there's always that embarrassment that we can't really discuss it. And now that paperback has arrived in May of '93, we can find this in all our bookstores and at the library. And I've clipped a few sections in here, and I have lots of questions.
Yes, it looks very dog-eared. I've been taking
it to bed with me, but then as I think I mentioned before we went on air, I'm falling asleep reading it, which means that I'm not keeping alert and I'm not going to learn anything. And maybe today you can help me decide what we should be doing to keeping our men excited about our relationships. It would seem that with the subject, what to do when he has a headache, means that more and more it's with people who've been in long-term relationships and a boredom sets in. Is that true, or are you finding
Not
it's every...
Not really. In fact, it's very interesting. Just recently, an issue of Mademoiselle magazine came out where the average respondent was a 22-year-old woman, and 50% of them said that they're not getting as much sex as they would like, and an even larger percentage at 22. And a lot of the couples that come to see me are couples that may have been dating for 6 or 7 months, and what the women are saying is that we used to have so much, you know, wonderful physical contact, and we don't have that much physical closeness anymore. And they get really upset, and they get really hurt. And the reason I wrote the book is because women were going around feeling like totally inadequate human beings, because men are supposed to be hot to trot at a moment's notice, and theirs was not.
Well, I noticed you set the mood here by explaining to us that there's a lot of changing in the sex roles right now. And one of your first questions is, why do so many men lose interest in sex? And right at the beginning, you want us to start looking at reasons and let us starting being honest about all the interplay around us.
Right.
And,
the headache is basically a metaphor. The headache
course.
can mean he's overstressed. It can mean that he's bored because, you know, he's been with you for so long. There are lots and lots of emotional conditions that underlie it, and there's actually a checklist to help you diagnose what
and
his
that is a little
headache
chart
is
here,
about.
right, as we get into this. Now, at that point, the woman is looking at her own reasons, and she can use this as a nice worksheet for herself. And then what if she finds that everything's checked, that yes, this is happening? She goes
And
to the
she's got her work
She
cut
goes
out
to the
for
next
her.
chapter.
Yeah, because the book is really based on rational emotive therapy, and
Right.
its best contribution is probably that it helps women calm down about the problem, to stop putting themselves down and feeling inadequate, first of all, and then secondly, to learn to be less angry at their partners, because there's a big difference between saying to your partner, you make me feel like I'm no longer a woman, and why don't you ever make love to me anymore, which is going to push them in the opposite direction.
Well, you had something about the whining philosophy. You don't believe that whining is an aphrodisiac.
No.
Why not? Why
you
not?
know many men who think it is.
And so if we'd learn to maybe present our case a little better, they talk two different languages. In fact, you even said, are we choosing the right mate as we start this book?
Right, there's a good checklist on finding out whether you have a mate who really does have the good qualities that make for a good relator, or whether you have someone who is so narcissistically self-absorbed that he probably isn't going to be a very good love partner.
Now, part of that problem will be if we get this far and we've decided we've got the wrong mate, we should just start over and get a new fella. But if we're stubborn and we've been with them for some time, we can proceed, and you've got a his and hers list on communications and emotions. And when we say something, we hear it differently than they hear it. They even had a thing on TV about her saying, I'm waiting for you when you get home. And when he got home, he said, I didn't know it was something special. And she said, what do you want me to say? And they want you to talk, what, more openly, or they don't want it? They want it quick? I mean, what do they want verbally to understand our needs?
You mean, what do men really want?
Yeah, what do they want? Can you sum that up?
I actually, you know, even though I think in certain ways men and women come from different psychological universes, I'm very optimistic that if men and women can deal with the differences in a more rational way and not get themselves so bent out of shape about them, that they can connect in much better ways. And that's really what my book is about. It's how not to give yourself a headache when he isn't connecting with you the way you want, whether it's he's not giving you as much emotional contact as you'd like, or as much physical contact, or he's not communicating, because men are trained differently from women, and it is hard for them to do the kinds of things that we do so naturally.
Well, now you have a great section on self-talk, where we talk to ourselves and we kind of translate what we think they're thinking. Do you think men do that too?
Think? Yeah, I think they think.
You think they think that?
Well, as we point out to people in rational emotive therapy, we have little tapes going on in our heads, and if she initiates sex and he starts withdrawing, what very well might be going on in his head is, oh my God, you know, I just came home from a full day's work, and now she's going to want this whole long, drawn-out shebang. She's going to want me to cuddle her, and she's going to want me to communicate, and she's going to want me to give her 20 minutes of sexual stimulation. I can't deal with this. I might fail, and that would really be terrible. And that's going to lead to anxiety and avoidance. She, on the other hand, might be thinking in her head something like, there he goes again, he's always withdrawing from me, he must not really love me, I guess I'm no longer really sexual, and then that's going to generate anger. So we need to learn to change those tapes in our head so that we don't get so upset about ourselves and our partner.
Now, right away, like you say, we don't verbalize those thoughts, but they're in our heads. And you say there are 10 reasons that are most frequently given by men for being sexually turned off. We can understand being tired, and we can see that. And I suppose boredom over an older relationship. But are there some other reasons that come to the fore that maybe a woman forgets? Is it her own attitude, like you say, the whining perhaps, or demanding?
Well, that's where the checklist comes in really handy, because the problem could be in 3 areas. One, he could have some physiological problem. He could just not be taking good care of his body, so his battery in general isn't charged. The second could be that he's just in a bad place psychologically. He may be feeling inadequate because he's just lost his job. He may be somebody who walks around with chronic anger or anxiety. So that's the second area to assess. And then the third are relationship factors. Maybe he's mad at you for some reason, such as the fact that you're out working full time and you're not as available to him.
Has a money issue entered in your discussions with couples, that there is an insecurity all of a sudden, that not only is she maybe appearing to be aggressive sexually, but she's financially doing better than I am, and there's an insecurity
I
there
think
sometimes?
it's hard. You know, there's backlash in the boardroom and there's backlash in the bedroom as women move from their old passive roles where they're really there sort of to follow the lead of the male, and now they want more equal participation. It's hard to adjust to it, and women need to be understanding of that. And I know it sounds like I'm saying women, once again, have to do all the emotional work, but let's face it, what are our choices? You know?
Well, and so you, in this book, for example, you say your major readers are going to be women, but that men who will read
They make
with
up
them,
a large, probably 97% of the self-help
so
book
if I
readership.
follow through on these new techniques or old favorites or whatever we want to call them, I do have to do the work, and I have to care enough to want to make the relationship work, right? So there is a sense of devotion on the woman's part to get it
But
to
I'll
go.
tell you, it's a lot less energy draining if you give up the anger and the hurt and the depression. You feel appropriately concerned, you feel appropriately frustrated, but you're not feeling worthless and depressed and inadequate.
personal attack.
And that kind of thing really drains your energy. So once you calm yourself down, you're in a much better position to say, okay, we've got this problem out here. I love you dearly. I love the physical contact we used to have. I really miss it now. How can we get it back in gear?
Maybe think of it as a work assignment, huh? A project, a challenge, something like that.
It is a challenge, and like any challenge, you can either eat your gut out, you know, in the process of doing it, or you can, you know, just look at the positive, challenging aspects of it.
Now, when you're about halfway through the book, you get to a point about getting him to see a doctor if there is a problem. Have you found that that ever works if there's an angry, unhappy man inside? And
Sure, he could have a problem with depression. He could have a substance abuse problem, which is, you know, tied in with a lot of his
And a
angry,
lot of denial
irritable
in that
talk.
area,
He could,
always.
you know, men are very good at taking their cars into repair shops, but a lot of them are very avoidant of doctors because they feel it's kind of weak or sissy-like sometimes to do that. So actually that chapter was excerpted in one of the major health magazines in this country.
Great.
The fact that men just
don't go in.
don't keep their hardware going, which means that the software, namely your brain and your heart and your soul, isn't going to be working very well.
And you obviously are one of the people who believe our sex organs are between our ears a lot of times with our attitude right before we even
That's
start
one place.
a physical attitude
That's
toward
one
one
place.
another.
But certainly having the attitude that this is the person I love, physical connecting is very good and feels good, and it's something that I want to get back in my life is going to help you a lot more than the attitude of, oh my God, we may as well give up on sex because we don't look like the people on television who are so easily having it all the time.
I thought it was fun too that you brought up some of the myths about lovemaking, and you go through some of the discussion there because, again, it's the old tapes we're playing from what we heard or read or learned as a young person or from the wrong person. And some of the things you have mentioned that the reader should take a look at involve things like lovemaking cannot be particularly satisfying if only one person is turned on, and that might be the case if the woman is trying to motivate the man. Is that true?
It's very true, but look how much of sex has been traditionally initiated by men.
When they were ready.
Often when they were ready and the woman wasn't, and all I'm saying is that we need to get rid of this idea that you have to be instantly aroused before you have sex. You better not be comatose. You better not be, have a real headache. But once you get into it, and once your head is relatively clear from distractions, and you're in a playful mode, and you know your partner knows how to stimulate you in ways you like, you can certainly get into it.
How about the myth of sex should happen spontaneously? We don't want to schedule time for this.
Again, it's nonsense because some of our hottest sex was during the time we were courting or when we were teenagers.
We knew we were going to see it at 7 o'clock,
and
right?
it was not spontaneous. We made dates a week in advance. We set aside a whole evening for necking and smooching. We had these long, voluptuous encounters where the erotic tensions built up and then ebbed and flowed. So if you don't take the time out to do something as important as maintaining that physical connection, you know, feeding your skin hunger, as a lot of women put it, it's just not going to happen. We're too busy. There are only 24 hours in a day, last I heard.
You're right, and we're all working. It's a double problem. Then the other one about intercourse is the real thing. You know, nothing else is really sex.
I can't tell you how many people use the two terms interchangeably. I haven't had sex with my husband in 6 months, a woman will say. And I said, you mean you haven't touched or kissed? Oh yeah, we've done that. We have wonderful play all the time, and we go to sleep in each other's arms every night. But they've defined sex as intercourse and nothing else counts, which is sheer lunacy, because in most couples, intercourse, especially couples, you know, beyond 25, intercourse is not going to go on for more than a few minutes, and the most delicious parts of sex are that build-up, that stroking each other's bodies, you know, perhaps with your clothes on. And intercourse is very nice foreplay. It might be very nice afterplay, but it's not the only act.
Do you think foreplay's got a bad rap? I mean, have we been here, men are just hate to hear the word, and women think it's going to be 3 hours. I mean, where's the attitude on today's foreplay?
What most people call foreplay is for women, for most women, the main act, and that is that touching your overall body, that looking into each other's eyes, the stroking, the teasing, the playing. And
a lot of men are not geared to be.
Not only that, but the sad thing is, a lot of them feel if there's any chance in the world that they're not going to have the kind of penile engorgement that they would like, you know, because they see the sex act as rotating around that organ, then they don't even want to touch because they're afraid it's going to end in some sort of failure and they won't be able to perform. And it's just painfully sad, because what they're doing is, first of all, worrying about something which is only going to create a bigger problem. And then secondly, they're depriving themselves of this wonderful physical contact and closeness. And if they just stop worrying about things, they would probably be fine.
Say something too. They don't want to hear you verbally say, "Oh, that's not ready for me." Or
yeah, but most women are very supportive. Most women, the majority of women, don't orgasm in intercourse anyway. So
you're still finding that to be the case?
It's definitely the case. Mm-hmm. The figures are pretty clear on that, because a woman's sex organ is outside, it's not inside, so she needs some kind of direct stimulation of that. So if he can't, you know, perform, quote, for 4 or 5 or 10 minutes, it's no big deal to her. There are lots of other parts of the body and other ways that she can be pleasurably stimulated. And if he weren't so hung up on his sexual ego and worrying about it and worrying about it and worrying about it, they could be very busy having some nice nookie, as we used to call it. You don't hear that word much anymore, do you?
No, you don't. You don't. And as you get into chapter 9,
50s.
yes, as you get into chapter 9, you do give some suggestions to follow through with the couples and the lady to maybe make some overtures, and what some of the things you're saying about petting and being together physically before the intercourse. Can you get a man to be patient, and can you start the touching process and get him feeling that he can wait and be comfortable and enjoy that kind of thing?
What you need to do is get sex out of this whole performance mode and back into the kind of playful, primitive act that it is. You know, as you see kids and dogs just sort of tumbling around with each other and laughing and tickling and teasing. And
the childishness of it, that would be the freshness.
That very primitive body comfort, and away from this orgasm Olympics that so many people are into these
which
days.
Might again put it back into in a playful spirit, in different rooms at different times in different ways. Now you've got children at home. What do you do then? Then you have
send them to their grandparents.
I see. So you do believe that honeymoon away from the routine of children and family if you're in a crowded home situation, because that inhibits, I'm sure.
Or a lock on the bedroom door. But again, we need to realize that we're rarely going to have the ideal and perfect conditions for sex. So if you have a lock on your bedroom door so that you know somebody isn't going to be barging in at any moment, if somebody isn't off screaming at the top of their lungs in another room, you can
just
still
distractions,
fit in sex, at least the quickie kind. And then perhaps on the weekend, when you have more time and more privacy, you can have your gourmet physical encounters.
Now, most of the suggestions here are assuming that the couple still wants to work at this together, that he's not uninterested because of another affair or because the marriage is not going anywhere. We're still hoping that everything as we work toward the end of the book here is still to keep that couple more involved.
And that's why most of the book is on really clearing up the anger, because couples don't divorce because of bad sex. I think they polled one group of psychiatrists and maybe 7% of couples split up because of bad sex. 40% of them, and that was the most common, split up because the man wasn't communicating and expressing his feelings. So I say if you have a basically good relationship and relatively little sex, don't be so quick to run off to the divorce court. Sex is probably the worst reason to marry or divorce. Having that good soul connection is a lot more important. Now, if it turns out you don't have such a good connection and he's really basically somewhat of a screwball, he's somebody who's anxious or angry or depressed or just a person who's not happy in his own skin, try to be therapeutic with him to the extent that you listen to him and try to help him develop a more resilient philosophy of life, encourage him to go to a mental health professional. Some men pop right into gear with antidepressants because they've been clinically depressed most of their lives. And once you clear up some of that emotional detritus, as it were, then you're in a much better position to evaluate the pros and cons of the relationship.
What about some of the taboos that, even though you've made all your positive overtures and you're showing a lot of a physical affection and time together, whatever, that aren't just discussed, the man who really is just, have these things behind him, is there a way to get through that with a playful way, like the vibrators and the masturbating, the things that you've discussed, that people are now starting to admit that seeing and touching each other is okay?
It's important to acknowledge that probably for a majority of men and women, it's still very difficult and very embarrassing and very uncomfortable to talk about sex fantasies, to talk about sexual enhancers, such as vibrators or silky lingerie or whatever, and that we need to push through our own discomfort and bring these things up, because in the long run it's going to pay off, and we need to be a little bit patient when our partner says, I don't want that thing in my bed. That's in competition with me. And not get so upset or angry. Understand that this is not exactly the sexual script that he grew up with, and that it may take him a while to get used to it. And again, you're not going to allay his anxiety by saying, you're a prude and you'll never want to try anything. You're going to allay his anxiety by saying, I know it sounds a little weird. I didn't think I'd ever live to see the day that, I was suggesting these sex toys too, but, heck, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Let's try it.
Well, what about the outside the home influences too, that sometimes a man might be turned on or think it's interesting or be with the guys to go to these topless bars or these X-rated movies? Are those things helping us or hurting us at home in keeping our own sexual games at home and interest in the wife? If he can solve his interests other places visually, they're saying visual sex is becoming acceptable.
Sexual fantasies are around. They're in our dreams. They're all over the media, etc. They can be used in a good way and they can be used in a harmful way. If you think of a fantasy as a sort of movie of the mind, it may occasionally help kickstart your sex drive so that you're there and available for your mates.
If it's directed at home again.
Yeah, so again, it can be very good for keeping the home fires burning. However, if the guy convinces himself that the only way he can get sexually aroused is if he is out picking up somebody who looks like Julia Roberts or is stimulating himself in tune with a Playboy magazine, if he's convinced that that's the only way he can get aroused and he can't possibly get aroused by his best friend and the mother of his child because she's 20 pounds heavier, then he's got a problem. He's got a real failure in imagination.
You had a neat paragraph about that, and I think I've misplaced where it was, regarding our surface image, and a lot of that you've blamed on advertising, that we do look at a car or a home or a meal on what it looks like first, and then and you think maybe do men have more of that attitude of appearance than women?
I think we all do it. I mean, I can't tell you the number of women who've come to me and they describe this person who's got a really defective character. He's very self-involved. And I said, well, what attracted you to him? he had a nice bottom.
In those days.
That's, yes. I said, that's a really good basis for choosing a mate. Or she just really turned me on. There was instant chemistry. Or he...
All that superficial.
And instant chemistry can fade very fast when you were talking about somebody with major league personality problems or somebody who doesn't believe in egalitarian relationships. So that instant chemistry is very elusive. I actually know many couples that have been good friends for 2 or 3 years, no sexual interest whatsoever, got together and have the most loving, wonderful, sensuous relationships now. So instant chemistry is a lot of hoopla.
And you mentioned before we started too that the long-term relationship can have so many other values and sharing, and you wrap up toward the end of the book with how to be happy though horny. And so are we going to learn to live with some of this denial, or what is some of your suggestions with your groups that you talked with in this area?
What I'm really talking about in the book, in the last analysis, is self-empowerment for women, so that we don't let our self-worth hinge around whether a man is affirming us in some way, whether it's emotionally or physically, that we pivot around our own cores of security and we inject passion and enthusiasm and sensuality into our lives with him if he'll join us, or without him if he won't. And that means, you know, romping with your female friends and giggling and laughing, getting massages, enjoying the feeling of the sun on your body. There are lots of ways of having a sensuous existence, whether or not you're with a man who connects, let alone whether you're with a man at all.
But you do suggest that that person stay with you if you're happy with every other aspect of his life, because obviously you have to value everything.
If you want to be mated and he's got most of the characteristics for a good mate, and he meets most of the job description, and you probably ought to think twice about deciding you're going to throw him back into the pool just so that you can have somebody that you have hot sex with.
What was the bottom line of some of these stories? People who worked with you for months and months, and then you got the case studies from that kind of research, or did you go out around the country too?
Well, I do a lot of lectures and workshops, not only across the United States, but around the world, because our institute has affiliates all over the place. So,
have you seen any difference in geographic
not
parts
a lot.
of the world?
Actually, my book is now published in France, in the British Isles, and in Argentina. So
it's good to know the French are dealing with these kind of problems too. You know, this with the perfect
title,
lovers.
The title in French is called "The Gentleman Has a Migraine."
Oh, do you speak French?
Enough to translate.
Could you say that in French?
Monsieur a sa migraine.
Oh, migraine.
Yes.
And then there's the prescription for that is patience and understanding, and maybe even reading this book together, I would think, would be, if you can get the man
if
to
you
take
can get
the
the man
time
to read it
with
with you, then you're 95% there already.
Now you'll be
and if not, then accept the fact that we women are probably going to be the emotional administrators in relationships, and we can either do it with class and grace and without eating our guts out, or we can make ourselves miserable, you know, trying to draw blood from what at times seems like a stone.
Can we go one step further and help our sons become more attuned to women's needs and just caring relationships with children, and maybe is there something we can do?
It's a noble ideal, but, you know, again, there are a lot of...
I'm wondering how they can grow up to be more aware, if there's anything we as women could do.
To try to see women as sexual subjects and not just sexual objects, as people who, just as we're learning to participate fully in the workplace, who can participate fully in
at home
shaping
too.
Our sensuous life.
Well, thank you, Janet. I tell you, if we can learn some of these things and then live them, we'll do wonders. And we want to thank you for being here today, Janet Wolfe, who's written the book, What to Do When He Has a Headache. And we've had a discussion here today that I think we'll remember. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.